If you had told me 4 or 5 years ago that I would hear 3 Mile Island is coming back in my lifetime, I would have never believed you. We need as many energy generating assets that are using non-fossil fuels to be able to stop climate change and really create a greener future. So fusion and fission are both a part of this.
Welcome to Sustainability Leaders. I'm Michael Torrance, Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO. On this show, we will talk with leading sustainability practitioners from the corporate, investor, academic, and NGO communities to explore how this rapidly evolving field of sustainability is impacting global investment, business practices, and our world.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of Bank of Montreal, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
Today's guest is Matt Morris, associate with Hitachi Ventures, the global venture capital arm of Hitachi Group. Matt's focus is to help Hitachi invest at the intersection of deep tech and climate. The venture fund isn't just looking at commercializing new forms of clean energy, but also taking into account how its target companies interact across an entire value chain. We'll discuss some of the fund's interesting theses, which are at the forefront of topics like clean energy, including fusion and fission. Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Michael, thank you so much for having me as well. Excited to be here.
Let's start out with a little bit of background for the audience on Hitachi Ventures. Many listeners will be familiar with the parent company Hitachi, which is a Fortune Global 500 company doing electronics and other things. But what's the relationship between Hitachi Ventures and Hitachi, the parent?
So Hitachi Ventures, again, as you aptly stated, we are the corporate venture arm of Hitachi, but we are more of like an outside-in approach to the ecosystem. So what that really means is we engage with investors, founders, and subject matter experts across all of our different areas and theses to navigate information as well as develop deep expertise from our perspective on the open markets, while also being able to leverage the insights and strengths of Hitachi before making an investment decision. So how we actually operate as a fund, you can view us more as an institutional investor with an LP-GP relationship with Hitachi. So while we don't need business unit approval for making decisions, we do like to align with Hitachi and utilize their resources and expertise to make the best investment decision possible. We invest pretty broadly across Hitachi's core businesses. So while I myself focus primarily on climate and industrials, we also invest in other sectors as well, including AI, digital, healthcare, semiconductors, you name it. If you can think of Hitachi, we're likely to do it.
So what can you tell me about the fund's investment approach and in particular your focus on clean energy technology?
Yeah, so we tend to look at clean energy and climate pretty holistically, but the major tenets that we look for is that the economics for themselves have to pencil out, regardless of the environment and ecosystem they are. So we're trying here to make the best investment possible. So the way that I like to say this is no feel-good investment, no frills, making sure that we're investing in the best company possible where the economics pencil out. So where we tend to look at is more so on how Hitachi, having acquired ABB Grid and Hitachi Energy, thinking about how we can deploy the best assets possible for areas around data centers, for areas around general baseload power, and how we can think about the entire life cycle of an energy investment from the venture capital perspective, including grid interconnection, being able to get through queues, as well as trying to find the best type of energy source for the right customer. So from our investment lens, we are pretty holistic in how we view this, but in terms of what that actually means in practice, think of things like nuclear, geothermal, bioenergy, carbon capture systems, fusion. So as you can see from our portfolio, we're actively taking steps in that direction.
So that's interesting. You're really focused on the economics and not just policy focus or trying to achieve the biggest sustainability impact, which is really critical for a business model to be successful. Applying that lens, what are some of the specific sectors and business models that you're focused on and seeing the most promise in over the next 5 to 10 years?
So number one is how quickly can we actually develop infrastructure? What is the timelines and technologies that are required and supply chains that are required to make an investment happen or make a customer, utility, and a data center or some other site want to be able to build into this? And then lastly, how does that actually timeline-wise, construction-wise get to market? So these can be things like nearshoring and developing robust supply chains and building out your manufacturing stack to make things mass produced and manufacturable for the long term, being able to have ready and operational O&M for maintenance going forward. And then lastly, can we decrease the time of construction to get things on site faster, quicker, and cheaper? So decreasing labor costs, decreasing your cost of capital, and all of this coming together to make developing new energy assets the fastest, cheapest, and safest thing that you can do for a given customer without having to go through the traditional legs of getting an infrastructure project done today.
Well, let's unpack that then maybe with some specific case studies, and maybe we can start first with energy generation. Fusion energy is something that's been receiving media attention, and there's obviously a big hunt for any sources of new clean power, and fusion is one of them. I understand that you guys have had a focus in that area. What can you tell us about the current state and future of nuclear fusion as an actually deployable energy source? And what are some of the business considerations that you have in looking at that sector?
Yeah. So if we take it at face value, everyone has always said that fusion is 30 years away due to technical challenges, due to scientific research, and it being a scientific challenge. Over the last few years, we have started to see some of those sciences start to play out to become engineering challenges that have become solvable. But when we look at the timeline for getting fusion down, it's not as simple as fusion will be here within the next 10 years. We are solving some of the fundamental problems to date to get fusion down, but to develop a full-fledged gigawatt scale power plant, there's still some hurdles that need to be accomplished. So in terms of what the state of fusion is, many of the companies that have come out in the last 6 to 7 years have developed and made significant breakthroughs on a pathway to get to Q scientific or getting more energy out than you put in, having shown with NIF that we are able to get positive fusion. It is done. And now the companies in the back end, both in magnetic confinement and inertial confinement, have started to make technical progress on some of the subcomponents that are enabling this to get to market. Now, we are still in an area where the timelines are still long. Will we see fusion in our lifetime? Personally, I believe so. In terms of how long it will take, I think it'll take at least another decade to get there, based on some of the technical challenges that we still need, some of the supply chain that exists around tritium, and some of the subcomponents being developed, especially like plasma-facing tiles and things like that. But ultimately, this current crop of fusion companies has real potential to make Q engineering and Q economic viable, bankable for the long term. So as we navigate the fusion market, we see genuine interest from utilities and off-takers looking to have either LOIs around PPAs. We see on the technical side, companies are able to de-risk the fundamental and core competencies around their businesses, whether it's producing HTS magnets, whether it is producing certain types of coils for their systems, showing that the lasers that they're using are there, and fuel amplification targets that can actually produce viable fuel output or viable energy output based on the types of targets that are being done. Doesn't mean everything is going to be easy, but as the ecosystem continues to work cohesively together, we're seeing progress be made at speeds that haven't been done before.
Can you give us any examples of companies that you're looking at or invested in that space?
So we are currently invested in Thea Energy, a New Jersey-based nuclear fusion company that is making modular planar coil stellarators. Stellarators are another type of magnetic confinement reactor, similar to tokamaks, but a little bit more donut-shaped in scale. And what Thea does especially best, and what their value proposition is that they're focusing on producing these modular stellarators that can be produced via mass manufacturing techniques, have repeatable operation and maintenance cycles, and use a simple plasma such that you're not having types of zebra striping or temperature gradients across the entire plasma as you might see in other types of systems. What makes them particularly viable and go for a long haul is that if you need to do significant O&M or replace different parts of the stellarator as a whole, doing that repair would require complete system shutdowns, would have a high level of replaceability, i.e. that means that you would likely need to have more than specialized components that may have long supply chains that may not fully exist today. But where Thea really shines is that everything that they're doing is going to be more like a Lego block mentality. Can you replace certain panels, replace certain components that make it much more efficient to do this for the long haul, that you can have a long-standing energy system that won't have major downtimes. Additionally, too, given that the magnets that they're using, you can use these repeatably across the entire system. So their orientation can be controlled via dynamic software, and this can also maintain that plasma shape over the long haul and adjust as it needs as there is like temperature changes or any types of magnetic swings that happen on that. This requires a lot less pressure, a lot less degradation, and then maintains your whole system for a much longer period of time.
So coming back to one of the first points you made about really pursuing things that are economically feasible, how do you reconcile that experimental innovation stage that a company like that's in with the business case and the economics and the feasibility of the business, the underlying business?
So to answer that with respect to fusion, it comes now down to how can we decrease the cost of the elements. So obviously you're decreasing the capex or cost per kilowatt at scale. If you're doing this from a component side or a physical supply chain, we're looking for things that can have robust supply chains that can be produced in repeated fashion, that can be, even with variations in quality, can still help make a functional reactor go for the long haul. So with all of these things together, ordering a bulk mass production, having an actual existing manufacturing line, these things help cut costs like pretty widely across the board versus doing it on a project level basis. And by project level basis, I do mean more so around, doing it one off for each system for each order. If you have the systems in place to produce en masse, you can decrease the cost over the long haul. So going from that, this can now start to inform how you start to reduce the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy, to have a cost of power purchase that makes sense for you going forward at the largest scale. So if you look to fission, for example, and see some of the challenges that we've seen with Vodal, with other products in the past, things coming well over cost and over budget, trying to get to a bankable LCOE, we can take the lessons that we've seen from 2000, early 2010s on the Vogel project, apply those to fusion, and try to build the best possible way and plan going ahead to actually producing these fusion reactors while eliminating a lot of the cost barriers and parameters that impacted nuclear fission for the last however long.
Well, you mentioned fission. That's making a bit of a comeback, it seems, recently. There's been investments by companies like Microsoft looking at either restarting nuclear power plants or investing in new types of nuclear to support data center energy needs. What's your assessment of that segment of the clean energy sector?
Well, first, if you had told me 4 or 5 years ago that I would hear 3 Mile Island is coming back in my lifetime, I would have never believed you. We need as many energy generating assets that are using non-fossil fuels to be able to stop climate change and really create a greener future. So fusion and fission are both a part of this. But fission is something that we've understood for quite a long time that was improperly demonized for 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, really is starting to make the comeback for the right reasons, in that we need more firm power. It's something that we know actively exists and we know how to operate, has made significant advancements over time. And now that the advent of AI and the need for data centers is coming online, plus being able to modularize types of reactors to move forward and have better fuel shielding and reprocessing capabilities, we're now in a place where having universal nuclear power, or at least nuclear power for energy independence, especially in the wake of the current geopolitical environment, these are the right catalysts to put nuclear fission back on the map. And you're seeing that all over the investment map, whether it is from hyperscalers who are actively looking for firm power and looking at nuclear as a potential source here to get online soon. So with these tailwinds, the time for the second atomic age is happening now. So really excited to see here. And we're actively looking into the space and making bets.
The criticism I've always heard about nuclear power is that it entails high capital costs, high costs to maintain, and therefore it's not economical, particularly if you compare it to other types of energy, electricity generation, like, say, solar power. How do you think about that now? Is it just that the market conditions have changed, so that's no longer the case? How do you respond to those kinds of criticisms?
I mean, it's not just about the market conditions and the need for offtake and the need for more electricity. If you look again historically at what's happened in fusion, most of the costs come from construction and financing of the reactors. Now, in a similar to the way that we view Thea Energy in terms of trying to mass manufacture fusion reactors, we're now moving into a wave for where can have mass manufactured fission reactors as well. Additionally, too, we have seen better methods and better reactivity based on fuel, based on enrichment type, etc. We are personally invested in Allo, but we also seen a lot more companies trying to use triso fuels and other types of fuels with novel materials for better shielding and containment of fissile components and fissile materials. We're seeing all these pieces start to come together to make better reactors that are just more economical, can be scaled down, and have more immediate offtakes in the right timeframes. Now, in terms of what we look for in terms of actual economics, those wildly vary based on if you're going for gigawatt scale power versus 10 to 50 megawatt power electric plants. Still, something can be bankable and proved out. It's just a matter of time.
Can you just unpack that a little bit more and maybe give some other examples about these advancements in reactor technology? What are you seeing in terms of the improvements in efficiency and safety and all of these traditional concerns with fission-based nuclear power?
If we look historically again, most of the reactors that were developed in the 1970s, we'll call them Generation 2, had active safety measures. And these, again, were humans working directly on maintaining the day-to-day operations of a nuclear reactor and avoiding any pitfalls that can create a Chernobyl-like situation. As the nuclear reactors and nuclear reactor technology has developed, a lot of work has been done on passive safety. So how can reactors be more self-containing? How can we have more software involved to prevent any adverse calamity from a reactor meltdown? And also improving on some of the subcomponents and fuels themselves to be able to either be meltdown proof or contain nuclear waste. So with these coming together, we're now in the fourth generation of nuclear reactors. We're seeing use of better coolants, those things that can extract heat more efficiently, like lead, sodium. We're seeing new types of fuel that, again, have different fuel parameters. So uranium zirconia hydride, which has a negative reactivity coefficient. So as it gets hotter, the less it reacts.
So when it comes to this future state, we're going to need multiples in terms of energy availability that we've had in the past to be able to power the future economy. Beyond what you've already told us, what other kinds of energy technologies are you looking at?
Absolutely. So outside of fission fusion, we are looking into areas like geothermal and having access to both heating and cooling from geothermal as well as power. We're looking into bioenergy carbon capture and sequestration. So how can we use our local carbon reserves in biomass as ways of producing localized power using our localized resources and closing our supply chains to within 100, 200 miles of where we need power? Those are the major baseload areas. Outside of that, I would say still looking at long duration energy storage and how we can better assemble new types of batteries. What are some of the key components that go into it? And how do you build end-to-end supply chains around it? All of that is to say is that there needs to be some fundamental way of having firm power, and everything else on top of that is just glory.
What role will battery storage play in the future of our energy systems, in your view?
In my view, I mean, they can serve as, again, like a way of firming baseload power, but also to, as we onboard more renewables like solar and wind, just generalized backup for both the grid and for individual C&I institutions. So focusing more on the industrial side, how do you make sure you have redundancies in your power? That's the major thing that I care about, and I think can be a real bastion and market driver for enabling these assets going forward. There's obviously also other areas where we see batteries being able to play, both in wholesale markets and ancillary markets for power firming, frequency regulation, everything in between on the ancillary services market. But who's going to pay the bigger buck for putting things down, and what does it mean? It's redundancy, it's having access to power, because that is going to be the one thing that drives industrials going forward.
It's such fascinating insights, Matt. Really thank you for all of this discussion today. Do you have any final thoughts for the audience about the work you're doing and what you're seeing and where things are going?
Yeah. So I'd say, just to leave it, as we think about the clean energy transition, honing in on the fact that everything becomes material at the end of the day, focusing on the supply chains that can enable the development of new energy assets are likely going to be the drivers for making all of these new assets economical. There's still some fundamental technical work that needs to be done. However, we're still in the throes where there's enough market momentum and need for power and demand going forward that is pushing technology to the limits to be able to develop something that is bankable, viable, and can last in the market for a while. So we're just at the beginning of seeing what our new generating assets and clean energy revolution is about to achieve. If you want to have a conversation in 2030 and see how we're doing, I'm excited to chat more on that.
Well, I'll look forward to that conversation, Matt. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It was a great discussion.
Thanks for listening to Sustainability Leaders. This podcast is presented by BMO. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. Press the follow button if you want to get notified when new episodes are published. We value your input, so please leave a rating, review, and any feedback that you might have, or visit us at bmo.com/sustainability leaders. Our show and resources are produced with support from BMO's marketing team and Puddle Creative. Until next time, thanks for listening and have a great week.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer